Welcome, Andrew, to Nothing Conversations. Can you share a little bit of the story of the character of Andrew?
Oh boy. Where do we start?
Take your time.
Huh. For some reason, that's a tough one. For some reason, I've always, or should I say, prior to awakening, I always avoided the personal domain almost entirely for some reason. Maybe it's because the personal domain is so, it hurts, right? For most people. As soon as the so-called unawakening happens, right? When the ego develops, the separate sense of self, we notice the pain begins, especially for people that are into this type of thing and become seekers and then become or don't be whatever it is. Um, those who find their absence tend to have suffered quite a bit and tend to have felt perhaps even more separate than the average person, even though there are no persons. um, yeah, even now, maybe I'm avoiding the personal in a subtle way by going into this whole spiel. The first thing that comes to mind is that Andrew moved around a lot. I'd say the separate sense of self began probably around age 8 or 9. And that's when you might call it a feeling of depression set in. Um, yeah, feeling separate from, and then feeling special. Feeling special is another form of feeling separate.
So, what apparently happened that did not happen to the character of Andrew that did not occur or occur?
It seemed like he died, but obviously that's not the case because he was never born. Um, Yeah, it's weird because if we call it an experience, it means it's chopped up in time and separate from the other so-called experiences, so we can't call it that. It also implies that there's an experiencer separate from that which is being experienced, so we can't call it that. So, yeah, words fall apart worse and worse, it seems, as we try to talk about it initially. Um, it's not particularly a happening as if something changed other than the perspective. So it's kind of like looking at an optical illusion where you go, oh, it's a duck. Oh, wait, no, it's a rabbit. And now you can't unsee one or the other or both at the same time. So, a lot of people say, yeah, but, the common question I see in a lot of non-dual communities is they'll say, yeah, what about, in Zen, third mountain? And on a certain level, how could you ever see a mountain again?
Thank you so much for that. Let me go back to story time, sorry, because this is what seekers want to hear, and people
Sure.
that are going to be watching this are going to be
Yeah.
seeking. And so, in the brief history of the story of the apparent Andrew, was can you just give a little bit of story of seeking so
Yeah,
that people can
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. So the feeling that would then necessitate seeking began around 8 or 9. I would say seeking itself probably set in around age 12. And I started realizing that the stories people tell themselves are silly. And I started kind of looking into like comparative world religion of every type. I even convinced myself, forget if it was in I probably must have been like middle school. I did a little thought experiment where I convinced myself of each religion for a week. So like, okay, this week I'm going to convince myself of everything that Judaism believes. Okay, this week I'm going to be Christian, this week, yada, yada. And eventually I kind of stumbled upon Buddhism. And I remember reading it. And I remember originally thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to invent my own system because I'm intuiting all this stuff that I have this very strong feeling is true and is the actual order of the cosmos. And I'm going to be somebody special and important. I'm going to catalog all this and, write my own system. And then I discovered Buddhism. Oh, they already did it. And I went through each thing, was like, yep. And then it got to the no self part. And that made me feel very funny and scared. And I thought, I don't know about that. That can't be it. That can't be right. And I skipped over that, went to the next stuff. Yep. And so that ended up being obviously the key to this all, that which the ego wants to skip over or hide from or run from. And that's its biggest fear, I would think, is non-existence. And yet that's the key to so-called enlightenment, it would seem.
Andrew, what is enlightenment?
So enlightenment is when there's no longer any identity. It's when the false sense of separate self that we call person is seen through to be transparent. It's when seeking ends, when suffering ends. It's when you no longer believe you're the character. It's when you realize you never were the character. And it doesn't happen for anyone, because by the time it arrives, there's no one to claim it. And so at no point is Andrew enlightened.
Thank you. So what happened then? What apparently happened to the character Andrew? If you can just share up, that apparent story of awakening that doesn't really happen to Andrew, but if we can just take the viewer there.
So are we talking about the actual experienceless experience of awakening, or that leading up to it?
Both, if you like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would say, leading up to it, I've had little glimpses, obviously, little mini satori that don't last. They're fleeting little glimpses that seem huge at the time. But I would say there were two events that really stuck. I guess let me start with, so at 16 years old, I noticed something change. I don't know if you would want to say something along the lines of, this might sound a little woo-woo to some people out there, but the kind of the kundalini energy kicking on, if you will, just the little hint of it coming online, not the awakening itself of that, but just the coming online of that energy. And the weirdest thing was that my eyes changed. My eye color changed dramatically from a type of solid dark brown to a type of very vibrant hazel of every color. So I had a little crescent of blue in each eye, a little crescent of green, a little ring of orange, greens and light browns and dark brown. And so that's interesting. I always wonder if there's some kind of neurochemical shift or something like that. And then years later, I've had a handful of so-called mystical experiences, but not enough where I'm questioning my own sanity or anything, but just enough that you're like, wow, there's something to this, And around age 24, I had a type of what you might call a kundalini awakening. And then around age 27, I had what you might call a witnessing of some seemingly multidimensional geometrical shape kind of floating above my head. And the weirdest part was that at that time, I had the thought, oh, that's me. But then about 5 months later, I experienced what we call the non-dual shift in perspective that most call awakening or enlightenment. And now I don't know what to think about everything that led up to that moment. Because it's all imaginary, right? Everything you could ever experience is imaginary. So to try to categorize to what extent it's imaginary is interesting too.
I had one of those too, maybe more than a couple, maybe 4 glimpses, and I was like, "Oh, this is it." Yeah. And then you lose it, and you're kind of like, "Fuck, I want that again." So did you have I got it, I lost it, kind of like a period in this story?
Not really, because I kind of always knew that I didn't get it up until I got it. But obviously I would say the freshness and intensity of the non-dual state obviously fades after the initial big experienceless experience, the big shift. But it's still with me even right now. I wouldn't say it went away. It just kind of recedes naturally back into the background, which it is. I am the background, pretending to be Andrew. So the background's always on. It's always here, right? And once you see it, it's hard to miss it. So I never really had the experience of I got it, I lost it, I wouldn't say.
So can you take me there to the apparent happening that did not happen to the Andrew?
Yeah.
It's so hard to frame these questions. Can you?
I understand what you mean.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's funny, really, for the context of it. I think it's interesting because I've always come from a kind of a Buddhistic or Advaita type of perspective. And yet a lot of my mystical experiences, including the awakening, seem to have a kind of Judeo-Christian undertone, which really, I don't know why. Maybe it's just the culture we're raised in, or something to do with where we are within this dream, or whatever it is. We're here speaking English right now. I'm in the United States. I don't know. But it happened on Father's Day of 2017, the year of the rooster, which is a symbol for awakening. It's a symbol for Lucifer, of Jesus, all of which is very different from my Advaita Buddhist leanings. But I was outside and I was walking around a family member's property, and I had quit coffee a couple weeks prior to that moment. I don't know if that has anything at all to do with it at all, but it felt like mentioning itself, so it did. So I'm walking around this beautiful outdoor property, and there's flowers, and there's a field, and there's the sunlight and the cloud, and I just kind of was trying to figure out why it all seemed so perfect. And I was kind of like almost shocked at how perfect everything seemed. And I was just looking around trying to figure out why. And then Andrew just wasn't there anymore. Andrew went bye-bye. And I kept walking around, and I wasn't really having any thoughts. And I just felt this need. I could feel some kind of, there were a lot of family members there, and some of them were kind of triggering each other in a certain way. I could feel this like past traumas, and I could almost see it in a way. It was like it was very subtle, but it was almost like I could see for the first time in my life. I've never seen auras or anything like that, but for the very first time in my life, I could intuit or subtly imagine or sense almost like a clear egg around people, almost like glass. And I could see like the stories of their life kind of flickering on the inside like a screen. And I noticed that I didn't have an aura, or it shrank down to nothing, and that absence created some kind of strange vacuum, so that I would just spontaneously walk up to people, and my aura wasn't there. There was nobody there, and their aura somehow seemed to have more room to expand and then self-correct and then snap back into place. And it was almost like the trauma from their past spontaneously healed a little bit, enough for the drama of the ego mind to calm down and experience love. And I used to be, I am, I don't know, a kind of fiery, strong presence from a certain angle. And so people are used to me being there talking, and I wasn't there. So they kind of didn't even realize I was in the room, which was really interesting. It's almost like the art of invisibility. And when I got home that night, and I was in the non-dual state itself, you might call one taste. I was in that for, I don't know, 3 weeks or something like that. But I had a dog at that time, who's now passed, but my dog was blind and deaf and could still kind of sense me in the room, but I could kind of go away at will, it seemed. So I experimented with that. Okay, Andrew's going to go bye-bye again now. And when I would do that, the dog would get freaked out like I was no longer in the room, which was kind of interesting. I know a lot of this stuff sounds kind of woo-woo because most people don't talk about this type of stuff or experience this type of stuff. But yeah, it's interesting. And I would experiment with it, and I would notice the difference is the main thing. I would notice the difference. So I had experimented with being vegetarian or not on and off over the years. I think seekers are more likely to be vegetarian, for example, to try something to get there, another method. But I noticed the body just started walking and walked over to the fridge and started eating shrimp. I thought, oh, wow, that's interesting because shrimp was Andrew's favorite food when he was a little boy, and here the body's eating shrimp. It's really interesting. And it's just occurring. And I'll go outside and I'm walking around the yard and the legs are just walking. And I had heard people talk about that type of thing beforehand. I've been a member of different non-dual groups online and on Facebook and things over the years, like Exploding Rainbows, for example. I remember back in the day, years before my awakening, I heard somebody, I don't know if it was Nancy or Robs or Michael, one of them, talking about how the legs are just walking on their own. I didn't fully understand what they meant. When people used to say things like, oh, there's no doer, I would, just like most seekers probably think, oh, is that a cop out? Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Why are you saying that? Is that a cop out to escape personal responsibility? What is that? But no, it's just a spontaneous description of the awakened state. So one day I'm just outside, still in that non-dual state, and the legs start walking. I'm like, oh wow, the legs are just walking. The body just behaves spontaneously. So now if somebody asked me, what or who is Andrew, I'd probably say this body. And from this perspective, there's no one inside. There's no one here.
That's really wild and fascinating. The experience here was just so ordinary. It was almost like a non-event.
Yeah, I would say I was surprised by the fact that it wasn't surprising. It was, for me, it was the calmest thing ever. Like, you would think it'd be this mind-blowing thing, and it was just, the only shocking part about it is how not shocking it was.
Yeah, it's almost like it everything seems to be perfect. Like I saw dust and it was just, this dust is perfect, but it was just so ordinary. Everything was just ordinary. So what's I know these questions are kind of silly, but I'll ask it because these are the questions that people want to hear, apparently, or no one wants to hear. Was there a difference from Andrew from before and after that rooster, the year of the rooster?
I know some people talk about, like, some people are an asshole before and then they become more like a Buddha. To a certain extent, I would say a little bit. For me, happened the opposite, right? I became, on a certain level, like one of the first, it's almost like I don't care, like I was so caring, so sensitive, so loving. And now I still have that, obviously. I still am loving. Andrew's still intact in a way. And yet on another level, this is all a dream. And on a certain level, I don't care. On a certain level, I'm perhaps even a little colder instead of warmer. It's the opposite of what you'd expect. It's not what the seeker wants to hear, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, I was a teacher before, and then when this apparent happening that did not happen, I became a non-teacher, which was kind of like almost kind of like went the opposite. Kind of like I was meditating before, I was vegan before, and then I enjoy my steak now. Almost like the blinders off.
Exactly.
Like you don't give a fuck anymore.
Right.
Can you share a day in the life of the apparent character of Andrew? Sorry, I keep on fucking up these questions.
No, you're good. You're perfectly on point. So I would say each new day, and this is all probably sounds cliche from the people that have heard all these recycled words before. And I think seekers get frustrated when they hear the same recycled word. Oh, what are you copy pasting? You're not a real sage. You got a document somewhere, you're just copy pasting all the spring-loaded words you've heard. Like, no, this is what it's like for us. It's not like we disagree that wholeheartedly on what it's like, because this is what it is, But the seekers hear what they hear, and that's fine. I don't really care what they get out of it. But here we are, we're doing our function. This is great. And so it feels like extra. It feels like, wow, the body's still alive. Wow. That's what it feels like. It's like I'm only, this body's only 31. Andrew died when he was 27, so he joined the 27 club, which is kind of cool. You to have your cake and eat it and not eat it and imagine it and not imagine it, because the body's still alive. I'm here. But Andrew died when he was 27, and now the body's 31. It's walking around having an interview. But yeah, it feels like extra, and it feels easier. And there's a fine line when people say, well, to what extent should I seek enlightenment? If they're not there yet, what advice can you give? It's kind of like, on one hand, I want to tell them, listen, it's not a big deal. You're not really missing out on anything. You have it right now. You just don't know it. And as I think it was Nisargadatta that said, if it needs to be remembered, it's not true. And so it's okay that you don't know this. It's okay that because you are enlightenment. You don't need it. You don't have it. You are it, right? It's just a shift in perspective. But each day is easier. It was really hard. It was really hard. It was so hard to be a person. It was so hard to not want to kill yourself. If you're a true seeker, it's what you're doing. You're essentially trying to kill yourself. You just don't know it. You're looking for your own absence, and you think you're looking for the true self. But yeah, so on the one hand, I want to tell the seeker, you know, you don't need this. Don't waste your life chasing it. It's nothing. It's nothing. Don't worry about it. And on the other hand, I want to tell them, even though there's no purpose to life and you don't have one, this is it. This is the purpose to life. This is what you need. Obviously, that's not true, but it's so much easier now. So I suffered. You know, I don't think I suffered from age 0 to 7 or 8, but then I deeply suffered, deeply, from age 8 to 27. And I would feel like a liar if I said I've suffered at all in the past 4 years.
That's what people want to hear, is suffering.
Yeah, I think that's what they're looking for, right? Happiness. People say, well, you know, what are you looking for? Well, true happiness. Well, awakening is a prerequisite for true happiness, isn't it?
There was this moment that there was a lot of suffering here too, and I rarely really talk about it anymore. You know, sometimes when it comes out, you know, we'll talk about, you know, like suffering, and you know, it was just so unbearable. The me was so unbearable. The character was unbearable. Like they almost had to collapse and die, and with no one doing it. You know, just no. Was there an aloneness, an emptiness? Yeah, I know. Talk about that. Yeah, I know. It's so.
I felt like I was the only one, right? Everyone else seemed to be bubbly and smiley, and I think they say that in the Tao Te Ching, right? Everyone goes about their day with bright eyes, and I alone am dim. You know, it's like everyone seems so gung-ho about the monkey instinct programming of the human whatever, and I always just felt alienated, strange, embarrassed to not only be human but to be Andrew. And yeah, that aloneness set in around age 8 or 9. I remember, and people always, I don't even know if my mom will remember this fully because it's so long ago. And people always ask me the question after, did you really say it like that? Are you sure? But when I was about 8 or 9, I remember 10 at the oldest, had to be. I pulled my mom aside and I said, listen, like, I'm feeling depressed enough to tell you that I'm feeling depressed, type of deal. And she said, what do you, I was looking at me like, you're 9 years old. What do you know about depression? Are you serious? I was looking at me kind of funny, like, well, what are you feeling? What do you mean depression? What are you feeling? What do you feel right now? I said, I feel like I'm separate from the rest of the universe. It's the loneliest feeling ever. And I started to cry. And, that's what it is. And it's funny because, you can know all this stuff for sure and still not realize it. It's not the knowing for sure that ends suffering or seeking. It's the realizing it. And what you realize on top of that is that no human can ever know or understand anything ever, fully, ever, no matter what. And surprisingly, you don't feel that loneliness as much. I wouldn't say all suffering totally comes to an end, but I would say the edge is permanently taken off enough that it can never bother you again. If they nailed me to a cross and set it on fire, you'd probably hear me screaming and flailing around out externally, but inside, I don't really think it would quite get me. I don't think nothing can really bite me anymore, and everything used to bite me.
That's good. That's good. I was thinking about when not the realization, because no one realizes the unknowing of the character. If there's no Emerson, it means that there's no one else out there too.
Yeah, that's the main thing. If there's no me in here, there's no me anywhere.
There's no you, no one at all. Yeah,
there's nobody.
And that was just so fucking trippy. I was like, okay, it's just walking, breathing happening. heart beating. I think I was lying in bed. It was just like, I could not find anyone. It was just like heart beating, chest rising up and down, and it's just this aloneness. Kind of like, oh wow, it's liberating. It's also very sad.
Yeah, it's bittersweet for sure. There's no love. There's no anyone. There's nothing. Andrew was never born. So in that sense, I had this strange feeling when it was still fresh, when the awakening was still, I don't know how to put it. when I was established in that non-dual state fully, that one taste, as they would put it. I had
let me just clarify something. Sorry. When you mean awakening, there's no Andrew that awakened.
Correct.
Right? Okay, good.
Yes.
Continue, please, because the people will get confused.
Right,
this is a tricky languaging. Words are dualistic. Okay, so it's just awakening.
Awakening happened. Yeah, awakening.
Yeah.
Saw itself.
Go ahead. Sorry for interruption.
No, you're good. I just had this strange feeling of like, it's almost like every birthday party you've ever had wasn't quite perfect. There's something that just wasn't quite what you expected. But it was almost like I was attending my own funeral. And on the other hand, it was the best, most perfect birthday party that you never had. And both of those at the same time. So it was like I'm celebrating, and yet Andrew's dead. It's almost like, I think, I forget who it was, Romana or somebody. I don't remember or care. But they said it's kind of like being possessed, and I felt that way too. It's almost like, well, Andrew's not here anymore, but here I am. Like, what is this? I'm not here, but Andrew's not here, and yet, I remember.
So it's kind of like sort of going back to Judeo-Christians. It's like a zombie Jesus, basically.
Kind of. For me, it was more like a vampire. Because I was really interested in the vampire metaphor beforehand. And with this, I had a very interesting experience because the body's walking around and I'm not here. So now I'm this soulless bastard. Even though I and the Father am one, you don't have a father, you're not one. I'm this soulless bastard walking around, and I look in the mirror, and also the kind of the immortality vibe, right? I'm not afraid of death because now I'm dead, and yet the body's walking around. So there's kind of like for me, it was more like a vampire thing. So, and the main thing that solidified that was the body walked over to the mirror, and the eyes did not make eye contact. Most people, especially if they're a seeker, especially if they're on LSD or something, they'll look in the mirror and they'll look into the pupils. Where am I? I got to be in there somewhere. Where are you? God, you're in there somewhere, right? But when the body walked over to the mirror, it didn't make eye contact. And the ape body was seen as the other junk in the room was seen. But it didn't reflect anyone. There was nobody in the mirror. There was just junk in the background, and the body was part of that living junk. And I wouldn't say that I identified with the empty space in the room. That's as close as I can come in words to it, because there was no identity, but I was the background. I was the empty space, and everything in the room was junk, including the body, which sounds horrible. I don't quite mean that, so I don't mean to be mean about the body. It's an exquisite instrument within this dream. But
sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
The other thought I had was like, so I'm like, the brain is racking itself with all these metaphors it's accumulated over the years. I had the thought, I know a lot of people, like in the Zen community, for example, if you wake up, they'll basically wait a decade before they'll even think about allowing you to call yourself a teacher, just to make sure that everything's integrated and that, you understand the appropriateness of this and that, and you come back to a certain extent. And I remember having the thought, a sage is a broken mirror, 7 years of bad luck. Here I am going to have to relearn how to walk, relearn how to talk. It's like I'm a newborn again with fresh eyes. And so I thought to myself, okay, maybe 7 years after this awakening, there will be some kind of integration or some kind of completion to an extent that, don't know what the final word or sentence of that would be, but you can view awakening as the dawning, and then at high noon there are no shadows. And my intuition told me, for this story, 7 years. So if I were to believe that little story, and I don't know if I do or not, but if I were to believe that little story, then that would put me right around age 34 for when that integration occurs, and this body's 31 now. So I'm kind of halfway between dawn and high noon if I believe that little story.
Epic. It sounds like there's something more to attain, though, when you say that.
Yeah, I'm probably giving people the wrong idea.
Yeah.
You gotta be careful.
There's nothing to attain, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing to attain. It can't be processed. There's this is just my opinion.
It can't be understood. No, you're right.
It can't be understood. It can't be. There's no time to attain it.
Right.
There's no
Yeah, even sometimes I'll type out a comment or I'll say something and immediately I'll go, that's not quite right.
The first unseeing of this, it was kind of funny because I started writing some stuff. I called my best friend of 20 years and just kind of like talked to him like, okay, John, this is whatever. There's no me, there's no you. It's just like 2 hours of that. And he's so patient. That's why he's my best friend. You know what I'm saying? He's just so patient. He goes, cool, Emerson, let's talk again soon. I'm like, okay. I'm like, did you get any of that? He goes, I'm just happy for you. It sounded crazy. So I talked to him afterwards, saying it was like, that's a bit crazy. Have you talked to anyone about this?
Yeah. So I think most people, and maybe I'm guessing here, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I get the impression that most people, or a lot of people, don't mention this to people, don't mention it to their family, their friends. I've always been a little crazy, a little don't give a fuck. I've always been a little bit fiery and rebellious. And I've always liked to challenge people's beliefs. And I've always been maybe too confident in myself. So I told everybody. And how do you there's weird thoughts, weird ideas. It's probably the wrong way. Don't do it the way I did it. Don't not do it the way I did it. There's no doer, there's no non-doer. But how do I kind of set my parents aside, and I don't know how to tell you that your son's dead now. Don't tell me that, don't talk like that. Why? Told my grandma, hey, I'm enlightened. And obviously that's not what I said, but I said I experienced awakening. Why I can't even say that, right? I'm sitting there trying to tell her about it. And she's looking at me a little bit like, are you crazy? But at the same time, I feel like there's this tremendous noticeable boost in clarity and wisdom that's noticeable and detectable by everyone and everything you encounter, even though there's nothing and there's no one.
There's no wisdom.
Yeah, there's no such thing as wisdom. Yeah, you're right. I misspoke again. Wisdom's a bad joke. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I after that I kind of like learned my lesson, because I'm like, I was just kind of like, I thought that he would be super interested in that or anything, so I just didn't tell anyone. I haven't really I hang out with my friends and
yeah,
they're like, what's up? I'm like, nothing. So what have we been up to lately?
What is real? So many good trick questions.
So many good trick questions. I don't do trick questions because it's the next question would be, have you written anything? Are you writing? Did you have any teachers that you liked before? So two questions actually.
So before awakening, I was a singer, songwriter, and poet. I wrote over 70 songs, pretty prolific. I have a type of raw talent, raw creativity. I haven't written anything song-wise since awakening, and I kind of stopped doing it before awakening too. Not that there's anybody who's awake here. But I do have this idea where I'm, it's there's a lot of cognitive dissonance regarding it. It's like a tug of war, but there's a book that's trying to write itself, and there's a book that's trying not to write itself, it feels like. And the book is about Andrew's experiences And for some reason, I started with the awakening itself, the non-dual shift in perspective that occurred for no one. And I started with that one and started working my way backwards. And I've only written that. Like I forget how, but I had messaged Rick Archer or something at Buddha at the gas pump, and he had just kind of asked me about what the experience was like. And for some reason, I just started typing it all out. And so it typed itself all out. And I have the little non-dual experience blurb chapter or whatever. And then I thought, okay, I got to keep doing this. And I keep telling myself every day, like, hey, write one little paragraph every day. And it just doesn't happen. And I keep trying to do it, and it just doesn't happen. It's like the book's trying to write itself and trying to dissolve itself back into the ethers at the same time. I'm trying to muster up enough of a illusion of doer to get it done, though. And I'm also trying to read a book by Ken Wilber, Integral Spirituality, which seems like it's for a seeker to read, and I keep trying to read it, and I'm only on like page 10 or 20, and it just keeps stopping itself. I don't know how this occurs for most people or not. I don't know if they can identify is the wrong word. I don't know if they can feel congruence with what I'm saying or not. But yeah, I am trying to write a book about Andrew's experiences. It sounds stupid and crazy and misguided, and yet I'm doing it for some reason. I think it's important to share our experiences, even though there's no one here and no one to hear it.
Andrew doesn't have a choice, really, right? It's just what's
there's no choice at all.
Yeah.
Andrew never did have a choice, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like what I did too. I wrote maybe about 99 pages, and then I just pressed delete afterwards. I'm like, it's the same thing. Writing or not
because
writing.
Whatever we say or write down, we're trying to guide the seeker to paradise. And as soon as we start with, well, that's not it. That's going to misguide. That's not it. That's not it. That's going to misguide. That's not true. It's interesting, the battle that goes on. I'm trying to get through that battle. I've always been a walking paradox, it seemed. And now that I don't see paradox anywhere, ever, I'm finally comfortable seeming to be a paradox, I guess, in some eyes. So I don't really care, I don't really care.
Prior to this apparent happening that it didn't happen, it was almost kind of like that this character was a lot wiser. And now, I feel like I'm dumbed down.
Yeah, definitely. I like the way Michael Markham put it once. Somebody called him brilliant, and he said, "This does not feel like intelligence." And that stuck with me. Those words are good. It doesn't feel like intelligence. It's not. Andrew was so proud and brilliant of his genius mind. And now my name is Mud, like Wile E. Coyote. Wile E. Coyote, genius. And then when you fall off that cliff, right? My name is Mud.
Yeah, I prefer speakers now that would say that I don't know, compared to someone that would try to elaborate on something that's inexplicable.
Definitely.
So when someone says, I don't know about that.
That's if there is the idea of wisdom, that's it. Even though there isn't wisdom, I'll use the words, that's one of the wisest things you can say. And not just saying it, actually being in that, right? Zen calls it I don't know mind. They say, well, Zen master, what happens when we die? I don't know. How can you not know? You're a Zen master. I'm a live one. I don't know what happens. Or should I say we dies, right? Clearly we dies. Or I think it's funny when people talk about reincarnation, because they say, you come back, but the goal of yoga and Hinduism and Buddhism, the goal is to become enlightened and never come back. Well, if that's the goal, then why is the seeker so desperately clinging to reincarnation? Well, it's the same reason that their identity stays intact for decades. Clearly, that's a strong mechanism if it can stay perfectly intact for 100 years, potentially. It's never too late to die, though.
I never really believed in reincarnation, but I got into spirituality, so I started believing in it. In the past, I was trying to believe, well, if I don't get this now, maybe next lifetime, and And I would delude myself like, well, this is the only lifetime, and it was just all of this kind of like bullshit that was happening. Thinking about karma,
Yeah.
dharma,
Yeah.
and then I got good at Sanskrit, and I started,
Yeah.
kind of like regurgitating some Sanskrit words and
Mhm.
pronouncing it right. Did you go to a spiritual seeking, kind of like, and believed in reincarnation and kind of stuff?
Oh
And what do
yeah,
you think about that
definitely.
now?
Yeah, definitely. So I even though I believed in reincarnation, I also, how to put it, I also knew that I had the only goal, which was to awaken in this one lifetime. And I always liked the Buddha quote now, and I like it now even better. And that quote is, the problem is that you think you have time. You don't. So the way they might put it in yoga is that, you need to have infinite patience and be in an infinite hurry at the same time. And obviously, yoga and meditation are misguided from the awakened perspective now, because those are prescriptions, those are methods or techniques to try to awaken, and those don't work. Or should I say, maybe it's necessary to try that and then stop trying it or whatever. Maybe it falls away. But, yoga implies, yoga means union, which implies separation, of which there isn't any ever at any point. So you're trying to unify that which never was broken into pieces. So how could that possibly work?
Yeah, I think that the root word of yoga is yug, which just means to unite.
Yeah,
But what's to unite when there's nothing separated?
right.
Yeah, I just repeated what
Or
you
as I
said,
try to
but
tell people, I say, you're everybody right now. I mean, that's not quite it. You're nobody, but people talk about reincarnation, and it's like, well, I think Alan Watts touched on this too. If you are everybody right now, and a baby and an old person dies, and a baby is born, like what's the difference between saying that some identity that you're clinging to transmigrated from one body to another, as if you could be in a body and separate to begin with? It's funny because the concept of the soul, or that which reincarnates or rebirth, um, is the self, the false self. The sense of separation itself is what wants to continue. And so it invents ideas like reincarnation, for example, or an immortal soul. Or as I like to tell people, if I'm going to meet you halfway with the words, and if we're going to say that there's a soul, there's only one, and we share it. But it's not a self. It's not an identity. It's not even the idea of this ultimate formless absolute awareness is still a concept of a separate thing. So it gets really tricky when you start talking about it from that layer.
it's really tricky because there's no soul really,
Yeah,
because that also implies separation.
right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
no soul, there's no
Hmm.
self, there's no ego. You mentioned
Yeah.
Alan Watts. I like when he said, I think the biggest ego trip is thinking that you can get rid of the ego.
Yeah. Thinking you
Because there's no
can,
such
yeah,
thing.
right. Yeah. How are you going to delete something that's already not
It's not
there?
really there. Yeah. It's kind of
It's
like,
imaginary. It's like saying I'm a unicorn exterminator. How much are you going to pay me?
that's the same thing.
Yeah. How much are you going to pay me to make sure no unicorns enter your yard? I'm real good at making these fences. They keep the unicorns away. How much are you going to pay me to keep the unicorns out?
Speaking about Alan Watts, did you listen to any teachers prior to this? Was there any teachers or speakers that you read? It's another question that comes up during these kind of like
Um,
interviews. So I'm just going by the book.
yeah, I mean, I probably listened to, like, Ram Dass, Terrence McKenna, a little bit of Alan Watts, I guess. I kind of just always was voraciously, ravenously seeking everything. I was just always comparatively trying to absorb anything potent. And so, a little dash of Gnosticism, a heavy pinch of Buddhism. But I would say right before and after I got into Advaita more and more as well. And I think Advaita and Buddhism are highly compatible. And I think the main important key they both share is no self. That one thing I skipped over as a youth over and over again, the one thing I ran and hide from over and over again, is the key. No self. And the self doesn't want to hear that because it's reminded that it doesn't exist, and its whole function is to pretend to exist. And it doesn't, ever.
I forgot my question now. I had a really good question. Damn it. I suck at this.
It was probably too important.
It was too important.
Truly.
It came from the depths of my knowledge and my
Honestly.
wisdom, you know.
But I mean it. I mean that though. Like when people say like, well, it must not have been very important. No, it was probably so important that it, you know what I mean? It's just like, this can't be spoken. And so if you even come close, it's almost like if I have the strange words occurring now, that if I were to speak, if it was possible to directly speak enlightenment, the listener would go unconscious immediately and not hear it. That's the feeling.
It can't be spoken though. You know what I'm saying? It's just no words, you know what I'm saying, can ever describe something that does not exist.
Yeah. Or as they say, how could you describe
It's
the
kind of
taste
like
of chocolate or something if you've never had it?
it's kind of like muddying the water, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When words are being expressed, and
Yeah.
and that's okay too. You know what I'm saying? If that's what's happening, that's okay too. What do you think now of those teachers that you mentioned? That was my question.
Different things about different so-called teachers. I see them all very differently now. And people think it sounds arrogant if a so-called awakened non-person says something like, well, I view myself as equal with Jesus and Buddha and Socrates, and well, what they experienced was very ordinary. It's not like, I think all these religions and all the things about in Buddhism, they talk about the levels and stuff. It's all extremely blown out of the water, grandiose poetics, and that's all it is. It's just extremely hyped up poetically, and it's very, very simple and ordinary and attainable. Yeah, it's not like,
Well, if
it's
you're
rare.
If you're not here, it means there's also no Buddha,
Yeah,
no Jesus,
yeah,
no Ram Dass or whoever.
that's right.
So it's just all like equally nothing anyway.
They're all just little finger puppets now. Yeah.
They're just stories, right?
Yeah, they're beautiful stories.
And then that's when a lot of people, get a little bit, challenged, when people start speaking that, well, there's no Andrew, it means that there's no Nisargadatta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no Papaji, there's no Romana. Keep hyping up Romana, there isn't one. What Buddha? Yeah. There never was anyone here. It's not like Andrew was here and then he went away. And it's not like the appearing of the body is evidence of there being a person. I think many seekers conflate the word human with person. They don't understand that personhood is an internal programming function. It's not a physical thing, and there are no physical things. But if you just for a moment just assume there are physical things and this body does exist, even if you assume that far, there's still no personhood. The personhood is just this little functioning or non-functioning that doesn't actually exist the way the body does.
It's kind of funny because the word human comes from the Sanskrit manas, which means mind.
Or the word hu, which is Sanskrit for the love of God.
So it's mind kind when is there a mind?
Yeah, we're dream characters being dreamt up by no one. But I always thought that was funny too in Sanskrit. Hu, hu, is Sanskrit essentially for the love of God, human. Or another funny thing I always saw was
the love of God from the mind.
Yeah, the love of me. Yeah, the love of mind. And so I always thought it was funny, you don't call your cat a cat being. You don't call your goldfish a goldfish being, but you call yourself a human being. like you're trying to remind yourself or convince yourself that you exist. You're sitting there trying to convince, I am a being, I'm a human being. There's all these subconscious convincings of the perpetuating of the seeming existence of a separation of which there can't ever be one.
Isn't it just so fucking funny and just so silly?
Yeah.
Did you have a moment that you just laughed and laughed and laughed of how ridiculous everything is?
Not when it was fresh. And by fresh, again, I mean, I don't know how long it was.
Big cosmic joke moment. You know, I think I laughed for a couple of days and just kind of like, I'm like, oh my goodness.
See, that's the interesting thing is that, and of course, it's the mind that gets interested or not, and the mind doesn't exist. Anywho, it's interesting because people say that, you know, like in Buddhism, they'll say, you know, one person just burst out laughing their ass off when enlightenment struck. Another person wept and wept and wept, and then enlightenment occurred. For me, it was just totally calm. It
was not at that moment, but not right after too, like maybe weeks after or a couple of days after.
Sure. Just I laugh my ass off daily at it.
That's what I mean. Sorry. I just wanted to clear that.
Now it's hilarious, but when it was still fresh, hilarity would be considered drama even, and there wasn't any. So the word hilarity means to, I don't know why I'm bringing this up, but the word hilarity literally means it was so funny it drove you insane.
That's a good one. Actually, I like that.
But I think awakening in a way is kind of like going sane. You know, it's like, why do people go to a psychologist? Because they're suffering and they want it to end, and that's viewed as crazy. So the only reason you're ever viewed as crazy is if you go to a psychologist and say, hey, I'm having a problem, I'm suffering, and they pull their little book out of their guesses. It's called the DSM, and the Diagnostic Statistics Manual. They flip through the pages and say, well, listen, Jack, you came to me. And so let's see, these symptoms you're eliciting are this, and we're going to give you this or that. We're going to give you that or that therapy, and hopefully the suffering will end. And 11 years go by, and you've got a tome of the personal this big, and you're still suffering. And, you know, in that way, if insanity is a form of suffering, right? People suffer from so-called disorders. They suffer from it. So when people try to debunk or conflate awakening with something like depersonalization disorder, that can't be right, because depersonalization disorder is something someone would suffer from, and there's no one here and I'm not suffering. So there may be a certain element of depersonalization, but it's also funny too, because there are correlations, like a Venn diagram of overlap between certain psychological conditions and the awakened state. Psychopathy, empathy, but the ones that come to my mind are depersonalization disorder, because some people who have depersonalization disorder, they still think they're somebody, they're still suffering tremendously, but they'll say some very strange, insightful things like, well, you know, it just feels like I'm too aware of this greater aspect, this deeper aspect of reality. Like, you're too aware. Interesting. Or another one would be multiple personality disorder. If you see somebody who has 14 people in there and you're a seeker, what are you going to say? There's 14 souls in there going to reincarnate separately and they each have their separate karma? Or are you going to say to yourself, well, 13 of those are bullshit and that person's crazy and they've just they've compartmentalized to avoid trauma and fragmented the psyche in a way to get by and cope. And yet it's equally crazy that there's one in there.
Thank you. Last question here. I can't believe it's almost an hour.
Neither can I.
Yeah. Is this the end of suffering?
It's at least the end of 90% of suffering. It's at very least, the edge being permanently taken off. You know, people become drug addicts or alcoholics or desperate seekers because they're trying to take the edge off. And they could be on some crazy cocktail of neuropharmacological whatever and still be suffering. So it's I personally call it the end of suffering, and I say personally, because I know other people, again, words are funny, other living sages, if you will, have said, well, no, this isn't the end of suffering because I feel the suffering of the seeker still, right? So if you have enough empathy still intact, and you're confronted with a seeker who thinks there's someone and they're suffering, and you empathize with that enough, in that way you could still suffer, and in that way you would not, you're not avoiding suffering. So I wouldn't say that I'm avoiding pain or suffering. It's just that it's not what it used to be, and now you can even enjoy pain on a certain level. So rather than nothing, I don't know how to explain that. So
let me
it
rephrase
isn't,
the
it isn't.
question. Is it the end of suffering for Andrew?
Yeah, it's the end of Andrew.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you. I should have questioned it that way. Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's the end of suffering because there's no one there to suffer. There's no one there to suffer. It's kind of like I had a couple of friends that passed away, and he was just crying. There's no more Emerson kind of like holding on to different stories or something. It was just tears, warm liquid comes out the eyes, and it becomes stingy when it gets cold, sobbing happening. It's beautiful, actually. Isn't sadness so beautiful?
It is.
It's
and death is sad.
Yeah. Oh, it's so beautiful. Kind of like, have you ever had an intense pain? I caught my finger in between the garage door, and for one moment, it turned black. And at one moment, I thought I was going to lose the fingers. I'm like, well, I guess it's going to lose the fingers. I sat down, and the pain was so intense that it was almost euphoric. I was like, oh, wow, this is like a drug. Whoa. It was so trippy.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah. But there's no more kind of like, I'm such a stupid guy, I'm so clumsy. There was no story kind of like, happening. Yeah. I wanted to end that was your question, actually, but sorry, I just wanted to share that because it's kind of funny. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. And although there's no time, and
it's been taken.
It's been taken. And I'll pause this right now.
Thanks so much.